Portrait of a Girl with an American Dream. Natalie had always viewed America through a lens of fascination, a place she'd only known through Hollywood movies, streaming late into the Kiev winter nights, flickering on the walls of her modest apartment. Growing up in the shadow of Eastern European hardship, she was no stranger to scarcity or perseverance. Her family, simple yet loving, instilled in Natalie an unyielding sense of hope. Her mother, a high school literature teacher, nourished her imagination, while her father, a factory technician, modeled the steadfast work ethic that Natalie would eventually carry to a new world. From a young age, Natalie stood out among her peers. Her long obsidian hair and emerald green eyes were hard to forget, but it was her wise, quietly defiant spirit that truly set her apart. Even as a teen in Kiev, she was restless, never content with the limitations of her environment, forever scanning distant horizons for more. An avid reader, she devoured both Tolstoy and Toni Morrison, dreaming in 2 languages and thinking in more. Her adolescent years brought their own pressures. While other girls obsessed over pop stars and summer romances, Natalie poured herself into studies and secretly mapped out her escape. Modeling was not an obvious choice for someone from her neighborhood, yet the allure of self-expression, travel, and the promise of reinvention was intoxicating. By age 17, Natalie began to land small gigs, magazine shoots in makeshift studios and local fashion shows. Each job was an affirmation. Her dream was not just beautiful, but attainable. Kiev's blossoming fashion scene in the early 2010s offered her a glimpse of what could be, but the real stage, the world stage, beckoned her across the Atlantic. The United States, with its relentless energy and promise of reinvention, haunted her daydreams. She painstakingly filed visa paperwork, sharpened her English, and watched YouTube videos about American life, dissecting everything from slang to runway walks. Every setback, whether a rejected audition or an unfriendly bureaucrat, only steeled her resolve. Leaving home was an act of equal parts courage and longing. She arrived in Los Angeles, suitcase and savings in hand, dazed and spellbound by the palm trees and sprawling highways. Hollywood was nothing like the movies, but Natalie, with her quick wit and resilient heart, adapted. She balanced modeling auditions with part-time jobs, barista, waitress, dog walker, learning to stretch every dollar while not losing sight of her purpose. If she was exhausted, she didn't show it. Natalie was too busy building a new self to wallow in homesickness. In America, she discovered a paradoxical sense of belonging. The diversity, the noise, the shining and the shadows, all fueled her determination. Natalie was not content to simply exist in this mosaic nation, she wanted to leave a mark. Every day, as the sun set over the city of angels, Natalie promised herself she would not sleep until she'd moved her dream one step closer to reality. The risks were enormous, but so was her hope, a hope as bright as the city lights she now called home. A defining life-altering choice. For many, especially those watching from afar, the journey toward the American dream seems almost fated, a tale of destined triumph. For Natalie, that dream only became tangible the moment she made her choice, to leave her world behind for the unpredictable promise of Los Angeles. But as with any choice that truly matters, the reality was far more harrowing and nuanced than any movie scene or glossy magazine cover could show. It all started in the fall of 2014, amidst the palpable tension in Ukraine and the persistent hum of hope in Natalie's heart. She had just turned 28, the age when dreams start to collide with the pressures of adulthood. Many around her considered it impractical, reckless even, to abandon a stable job as a tax analyst for something as ephemeral as fashion. But every cell in Natalie's body rebelled against a safe life. She felt the pull of new beginnings like the gravitational tug of the moon on tides. Making this choice didn't just mean saving up for airfare and clearing out her apartment, it meant late-night conversations with her mother, tearful goodbyes to friends who questioned her sanity and paperwork that seemed to multiply each day. Natalie's decision was deliberate. Every passport photo, security check and interview at the embassy solidified her resolve. She was trading certainty for possibility, the known for the unknown. Arriving in Los Angeles wasn't a cinematic landing, it was awkward, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. Her savings felt insubstantial with every new bill, and her accent marked her as other in every crowded room. Yet every day Natalie chose, again and again, not to give in to homesickness or self-doubt. She walked miles for auditions no matter the outcome, built side gigs as a freelance interpreter, and learned to navigate the ranks of competitive modeling agencies, refusing to let rejections erode her vision. Perhaps the most significant aspect of this life-altering choice was what she left behind. A family who needed her, the safety of routine, the predictable seasons of Kiev. There were nights when the loneliness in America pressed in so tight she could barely breathe. But Natalie's choice was never just about career. It was about daring to design her own destiny, in a country where that gamble might just pay off. To the outsiders, it was a bold move. To Natalie, it was the only move. In Los Angeles, every sunrise was a new negotiation with herself. Was it worth it? Could she make it work? The answer, as she pulled herself through casting calls and side hustles, was always yes, even on the days when yes felt impossibly hard. An unexpected turn in love. Love in Los Angeles is never as it seems, a truth that Natalie discovered in the most exhilarating and bewildering fashion. By the spring of 2015, Natalie had found her way into the city's buzzing creative circles. She frequented gallery openings, rooftop parties, and industry mixers, always dancing on the edge between awe and ambition. The city was alive with possibility, but it was also a place where loneliness flickered like neon in the spaces between handshakes and bright, brittle smiles. She first met Alexander Black at a charity event in West Hollywood. He was the kind of man who seemed to be two people at once, composed to the point of mystery, yet undeniably magnetic when he let his guard slip for just a moment. Tall and striking, with a careful American drawl that contrasted Natalie's subtle Slavic lilt, Alexander seemed to walk through the world with the quiet confidence of somebody born into privilege. Rumors at the party swirled: tech entrepreneur, philanthropist, renegade creative. None of it quite fit, but it didn't matter. That night, his focus was on Natalie. Their chemistry was instant, an electric current that snapped between their glances. He listened with intent when she described her childhood in Ukraine, made her laugh at American idioms, and confided, in rare, unguarded moments, his own struggles growing up in the shadow of a demanding family dynasty. Natalie was drawn in, feeling both seen and protected for the first time since she'd touched American soil. For months, their romance blossomed against the vibrant backdrop of LA. Alexander introduced Natalie to circles she could only dream of before: private art showings, weekend getaways in Malibu, late-night drives up Mulholland, where the city spread endless below them. He was charming, attentive, the kind of partner who remembered her favorite flower and kept his hand tenderly around her waist in a crowd full of strangers. For once, Natalie let herself believe in American movies' version of love. Soon their connection deepened. After just a year of being together, fueled by mutual dreams and an undercurrent of longing, they moved into a sleek apartment in West Hollywood. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where their lives could truly intertwine. Here, Natalie's days were filled with early modeling calls, shared coffee rituals, and playful arguments about American versus Ukrainian comfort food. The seed of their love story seemed destined to take root and flourish. Perhaps the most unexpected joy arrived with the news of Natalie's pregnancy. The prospect of motherhood in a new land both thrilled and terrified her, but Alexander was overjoyed, at least in the beginning. To support her, Natalie's own mother, Lyudmila, left Ukraine and leased a small apartment nearby. The circle of family, once fractured by continents, pressed closer together in anticipation of new life. For a brief, golden interlude, everything shimmered with hope: a loving partner, a child on the way, the American dream within reach. For Natalie, who had braved distance and doubt to build a future in LA, these were the sweetest days, unclouded by what would come next. There was laughter at baby showers, friends dropping by to fawn over ultrasound prints, and promises whispered late at night inside softly lit rooms. She believed more than ever that this was what she'd risked everything to find. She did not yet know how quickly dreams could tumble into darkness, or how sharp love's edges might become in the city of angels. The dreamscape begins to distort. For a time, everything about Los Angeles shimmered for Natalie. Its beaches golden, the city lights twinkling just outside her window, the laughter of a newborn baby filling her apartment with a softer, richer type of joy. She had worked for every bit of this happiness: the hard-won contracts, the late-night rushes to auditions, making the little apartment in West Hollywood a true home. The image she curated on social media: picture-perfect breakfasts, romantic selfies with Alexander, the innocent face of baby Emily, belied the sleepless nights and subtle cracks beneath the surface. Yet it's always somewhere hidden in that perfection where reality starts to unravel. Natalie first noticed a subtle shift in Alexander, the kind that can be explained away at first: a distracted look when she spoke, longer hours at work, an edge to his jokes that never used to be there. The twinkle in his eyes, which once reminded her of the Pacific sun, sometimes cooled into a distant, unreadable haze. She found herself dismissing the small things, the cold silence that would settle after disagreements, his reluctance to help with Emily's midnight cries, the abrupt way his temper flared and vanished like a summer squall over the city. The world she had painstakingly built, one of hope, resilience, and fresh beginnings, grew hazy around the edges. Friends from the modeling world would message her less often. Her own invitations to brunches and gallery walks went politely unanswered. She brushed it off as the natural drift that came with motherhood, with adulthood, but a sliver of loneliness began to wedge itself between what she had and what she'd always dreamed. And Alexander, whose presence once steadied her, increasingly left her feeling alone even when he was right there in the room. It was in the little things, his phone always face down on the table, cryptic texts and late-night calls, a growing impatience with the needs of their new family. Sometimes Natalie tried to confront him, but Alexander always talked circles around her, his honeyed words turning concern into insecurity. The city outside remained gleaming and alive, parties, premieres, endless possibility, but for Natalie the walls of their apartment seemed to close in a little more each night. Their once idyllic home, full of sunlight and laughter, now felt shadowed. The distance between them, invisible but unmistakable, coiled tighter week by week. Natalie tried everything, grand gestures, quiet patience, fierce confrontations, but the shape of their dream life warped slowly into something unrecognizable. On the surface she still posted radiant photos, still smiled at neighbors in the hallway. On the inside she was fighting a gathering storm, hoping and aching for a way back to the happiness she'd risked everything to find. That first tinge of fear. For months, Marika's rhythm of life had settled into a seemingly predictable pattern in Los Angeles, balancing work, motherhood, and the gentle, sometimes stifling embrace of family. But new lives, especially those built in faraway cities, are often vulnerable beneath their glossy surface. Even the most radiant sunshine can't scatter every shadow. It started with something almost imperceptible, a gentle stirring of anxiety that Marika's mother, Olga, could not shake. It was the Friday of a long golden weekend and she'd called Marika 3 times without a response. At first, Olga dismissed her own nervousness as a mother's natural concern. After all, Marika was an adult, and life in a bustling metropolis could pull a person in many directions. Still, her daughter always called back. Always. By the afternoon, Olga's worry had evolved from a background hum to a loud, unrelenting disquiet. She tried calling again. No answer. She texted. The screen stayed stubbornly blank. The unease that gnawed at her was no longer vague. It was sharp, insistent, and laced with the kind of dread that mothers try their whole lives to keep at bay. That evening Olga's hands trembled as she scrolled through her contacts, debating whether to call someone, anyone in Los Angeles who might know where Marika was. Finally she dialed Vera, an old family friend living 2 miles north. Vera had seen Marika just days prior, laughing over coffee and pastries in their favorite sunlit cafe. Together, they decided it was better to check, even if it meant risking a little embarrassment if Marika had simply left her phone on silent. Olga grabbed her keys and coat, heart pounding as the sky deepened from indigo to a bruised violet. The drive felt impossibly long. West Hollywood's lights sparkled, flamboyant and indifferent as always. They pulled into Marika's building, a modern glass and steel structure too fashionable to look sinister. Marika's red sedan sat quietly in its usual spot. That should have been a comfort, but it wasn't. They took the elevator up. Outside Marika's door, everything looked exactly as it always had, but the silence in the hallway held a different weight now. Olga knocked, then called, her accent stretching Marika's name into a long, anxious plea. No reply, not even the sound of the television leaking out, or the subtle hush of domestic life. Vera tried peeking through the blackout curtains. She glimpsed movement, a figure shifting quickly out of sight. Goosebumps prickled along her arms. "Maybe she's not alone, maybe she's asleep," Vera offered in a whisper as if uttering it too loudly might aggravate whatever darkness lurked beyond the threshold. But the feeling in Olga's stomach twisted tighter. Her daughter never left her waiting like this, not since childhood. The fear that had begun as a mother's distant radar now rang like an alarm bell. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Desperation set in. Olga knocked louder, called Marika's name until her throat ached. She texted, left voicemails, messaged Marika's closest friends. Nothing. Only the city's indifferent noise drifting in from the street below, mocking her hope with each passing minute. Vera squeezed Olga's hand, and together they descended back to the lobby. Olga's mind raced. Should she call the police? Would they even listen? In America, people minded their own business, sometimes to a fault. She called anyway, explaining in halting, heavily accented English that her daughter was missing, possibly in danger, that something was wrong. The dispatcher took her information but sounded polite, not alarmed. "Maybe she just stepped out, ma'am," he suggested kindly. "Let's give her a few more hours." That night, Olga barely slept. She sat by the phone replaying every small interaction from the week before, every possible warning sign she might have missed. She texted Marika again. Each hour, hope flickered and dimmed. By morning, hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Olga and Vera returned to the apartment. The car was still there. The silence heavier. The manager of the building met them at the door, his brow furrowed, puzzled by their distress. Olga pleaded with him to let them into the unit. "Regulations, you see," he said. But eventually the sight of an anguished mother broke through red tape. The key turned in the lock, but the door wouldn't budge. It was chained from the inside. Panic now lodged in Olga's chest, icy and absolute. She called the police again. They came this time, 2 officers with calm voices and skeptical faces. They knocked respectfully but got no answer. One of them peered through the mail slot and recoiled. "No sounds, no movement," he told his partner. "But the lights were on last night, neighbors say." For hours, nothing changed. The officers, after some deliberation, left a card at the door. "Call us when you get home, ma'am," they told Olga. "I'm sure she'll show up soon." But Olga knew in her bones, knew with the dreadful animal certainty that only a mother can muster, her daughter was in trouble. The fear she felt was no longer mild or abstract. It had become a living, breathing creature, stalking the halls of the apartment building and shadowing every hopeful thought she tried to summon. The police step. In the days following Marika's unexplained silence weighed heavy and strange, thick with uncertainty. For every hour that passed without a word from her, her mother Olga fluttered between hope, clinging to the possibility that Marika had simply lost her phone or needed space, and a squeezing dread that something in their fragile new American life had gone terribly, irretrievably wrong. Sleep would not come to Olga, not with the gnawing ache in her chest, and the city's sirens mocking her through the open window, indifferent and far away. It was on the 3rd day, after her calls to friends and acquaintances yielded nothing, and her instincts screamed louder than logic, that Olga made the call to the Los Angeles Police Department. The dispatcher on the line was professionally calm, but Olga felt her anxiety and unfamiliarity with American bureaucracy tangling in her throat. In halting English she explained, her daughter was missing. She described Marika's habits, her routine, the impossibility of her daughter vanishing so completely without contact. The dispatcher asked for details. Olga repeated them, voice trembling. She described how the apartment door was chained from the inside, how lights had been on and Marika's car sat unmoved. "We'll send someone to check," the dispatcher said gently, and yet Olga could not shake the impression that they thought this was just another case of a grown woman seeking space from her family, maybe cooling off after an argument. Olga knew that couldn't be true. Not with Marika, not with her careful, reliable girl. A squad car arrived late that afternoon, sunbright over the glossy sidewalk. 2 officers, one older, skeptical but kind, the other younger, eyes darting between Olga and Vera as if searching for some clue being spoken only in their faces, met them in the lobby. "You called about your daughter?" the senior officer asked. Olga nodded, clutching Marika's photograph so tightly she feared it might bend. She spoke with a mix of plea and certainty. "She would not just go away. Please, you must check." The officers listened, exchanging glances, and then asked permission to try her door themselves. They knocked, called Marika's name, waited. No answer, no movement. The younger officer cupped his hands to the door, listening for any sign inside. The ordinary sounds of the hallway, the thrum of a distant elevator, someone's laugh leaking from a neighboring apartment, suddenly seemed intrusive, even menacing. "Does she have any medical conditions, any history that would make her want to leave?" they asked. "No," Olga replied forcefully. "None." They made a report, warned it was often harder with adults, and gently pressed her to go home, to wait. "If you hear from her, let us know. Sometimes these things work out on their own." They left a card, the badge number clearly written, but took nothing else. Not a fingerprint, not a footprint, not a single thing to prove anything had happened at all. That evening Olga sat at the window watching the city's neon lights, her nerves fraying with each hour of silence. By midnight she could barely sit still. Images flashed through her mind. Marika walking home in the dusk, a flicker of fear in her eyes. Marika's gentle voice, determined spirit, her laughter echoing through their small apartment. None of those memories fit with the suffocating quiet now blanketing her world. Unable to wait or sleep, Olga returned to the building at sunrise. The red sedan still sat in its usual place, untouched. Again, she pleaded with the building's manager. Again, he hesitated, offering explanations about privacy, rights, and rules. Desperation mounting, Olga pressed onward, voice hoarse from a night of worry. "If something is wrong, please, you must help." Finally, under the weight of her anguish, the manager relented enough to unlock the main door, but the chain from inside still held. Back at the police station, she begged them to try again. This time, one of the officers, perhaps moved by her refusal to be dismissed, perhaps simply realizing that the evidence of absence had piled high enough to demand response, said they would return. When they arrived, a small crowd of neighbors had begun to cluster in the hallway. Some watched with awkward sympathy. Others seemed merely curious, as if hoping for a morsel of drama in their otherwise routine day. The officers assessed the door, its stubborn chain telling a story all its own. After briefly conferring with Olga, the manager, and an increasingly worried Vera, they made a call to their supervisor. "Forcible entry is never ideal," the older officer explained, "but sometimes it's warranted, if there's imminent danger." Paperwork was started, neighbors questioned. Some murmured that they'd heard nothing unusual. Some mentioned seeing Marika with her little girl a few days back, happy as ever. Others avoided eye contact, anxious not to be involved. Nobody had seen or heard any struggle, though one woman, Mrs. Rinaldi from the floor below, said she thought she'd heard something being dragged across the floor a couple nights prior. The officers jotted it down, faces sober. They radioed for approval and after what felt like endless hours to Olga, donned gloves and prepared to force the chain. The sound of splintering wood echoed down the hallway. A sudden electric dread swept through the building, neighbors falling silent, Olga nearly fainting from fear. Inside the apartment was eerily cold, curtains drawn, thin light filtering through cracks, dust motes swirling in the stilled air. The officers announced their arrival in calm, practiced tones. "LAPD, anyone here?" But only silence greeted them. One officer moved to the bedrooms, the other methodically swept the living room and kitchenette. Nothing seemed out of place at first, but as they reached the master bedroom, the mood shifted. A faint metallic tang hung in the air. It was in that quiet, shadow-drenched room that the officers found unmistakable signs of a violent struggle. Bedsheets askew, blood spattered across the floor and mattress, clothing and objects scattered, as if in an attempt to create barriers or hide chaos. In the adjoining bathroom, the officer found traces of cleaning supplies, evidence of hasty, panicked attempts to erase what had taken place. The veteran officer called immediately for backup, shifting from procedure to urgency. "We have a major situation here," he radioed, voice grim. Forensic specialists, a supervising detective, and a swarm of uniformed officers soon transformed the quiet hallway into a tense, humming scene. Yellow tape unfurled across the door, lights and cameras materialized, and the corridor, mere hours before filled with the ordinary business of daily life, now throbbed with a pulsing collective anxiety. Olga was quickly escorted to the lobby, white-faced and shaking, Vera's arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Officials questioned them gently, seeking every fleeting memory, every observation of the days prior. Who had Marika spoken to? Had there been new acquaintances, arguments, noises, strange visitors? Olga answered as best she could, but her mind whirled with grief and guilt. While officers filed in and out searching for any sign of Marika or her child, word of the investigation began to ripple outward, catching the attention of local news and the broader Slavic community in LA. Reporters hovered outside, neighbors exchanged theories in tense whispers, and social media posts quickly circulated, painting Marika's image beside the word missing. The technical team worked late into the night, collecting fingerprints, searching for DNA evidence, documenting every inch of the apartment, carefully lifting items from tabletops, gathering stray fibers, swabbing the bloodied carpet. The professionalism was unwavering, but every officer there could feel the underlying weight of the tragedy. This was not the routine business of enforcing parking restrictions or refereeing domestic squabbles. This felt different. The scent of fear and loss lingered like smoke. Back at headquarters, detectives began to build a timeline. They called in Marika's boyfriend, checked building security footage, canvassed for witnesses. Neighbors described the couple, a seemingly happy family, friendly if a bit private. No one reported screaming or violence, no past police calls, no warning that the American dream had run so bloodily off course within those soundproof walls. As dawn filtered gray through downtown LA, the apartment was sealed off for evidence. But for Olga, standing alone in the echo of tragedy, the worst realization set in. The American police, so powerful, so distant, had stepped in, the outcome still hidden, already pressed against her heart like a final, heavy verdict. Tragedy unveiled. The hours bled together in a haze of blue and red flashing lights, the pungent scent of disinfectant, and the quiet, dogged bustle of city police. For a while the world outside the apartment was forced to a halt, neighbors pressed against cracked doors, the curious and the frightened commingling in silent anticipation. Inside, the Los Angeles Police Department had claimed the once cozy apartment, transforming it from a site of domestic routine into the epicenter of a grim, unfolding tragedy. From the moment the battered door was forced open, the air changed. The warmth, muffled laughter, the soft clutter of a young family's life was replaced by a clinical coldness. Officers moved methodically, careful not to disturb evidence. As far as procedure went, they had answered dozens of such distress calls, but few, even among the veterans, had witnessed a scene so chilling. The sunlight that filtered through drawn curtains seemed off color, unable to pierce the dark heaviness that lingered. A mother's trembling hands covered her face, muffling unintelligible prayers and sharp, stifled sobs. Within minutes, the investigation took a drastic turn. The master bedroom door had been locked from the inside. With the chain forcibly broken, officers discovered John, disheveled, eyes hollowed by terror or shock, curled in the far corner of the room, muttering denials at the floor, hands flecked with bruising and fresh cuts. Gone was the public persona of confidence and polish. In his place huddled a man overcome by a storm of guilt, dread, and animal panic. "Nobody else is here," one officer radioed, but dread jarred through every syllable. As the search intensified, a lead investigator's shout echoed down the hall, drawing all eyes to the disheveled bed, the hollowed cavity of heartbreak at the center of the case. Natalie lay motionless atop the sheets, the last shreds of her dignity preserved by the gentle way one young officer knelt to close her eyes. The brutality scrawled across the scene was unmistakable. Bloodstains splattered against the headboard, smears trailing to the rug, pillows overturned, the metallic scent of iron lingering in the air. Her once glossy black hair fanned across the pillow like a dark halo. Cuts and bruises mapped the story of her struggle, bitter evidence of violence unleashed after hope had already begun to decay. The detectives moved swiftly but gently. Digital photos were taken, every grim detail catalogued, every angle measured. A flurry of commands, "Bag that! Don't touch!" rose above the hush, punctuated by low words of condolence and grim determination. One of the officers tried to comfort Olga, but even the most practiced words felt empty. "We will do everything, ma'am, but you need to prepare yourself." As crime scene technicians descended, the investigators pieced together the horror. Bloody rags shoved into the bathroom trash, fresh scars carved into the drywall as if someone had clawed in desperate animal terror for escape. The perpetrator, once the pillar of Natalie's American dream, had been transformed into a figure almost childlike in despair, refusing food or water, retreating only into panicked silence. The paramedics tended to him with a wary eye, knowing now the role he had played in unraveling the dream. What followed became not just a family nightmare, but a city-wide scandal. News vans swooped in, reporters assembled outside the apartment building with their tidy microphones and knowing glances. Their voices, broadcast everywhere, picked up online, replayed to sickened relatives back in Ukraine, carried the details far and wide. "Former model found dead in apparent domestic homicide." The words flashed across every screen, transforming Natalie's memory from hope to horror in the eye of the public. Olga, shielded from the worst by neighbors and well-meaning officers, fell to pieces in the lobby. Her world, painstakingly rebuilt on a new continent, had collapsed. Even as police tried to coax a timeline from her, her thoughts spun. When had she last heard Natalie's laugh? Why didn't she see the signs hiding beneath the surface? The loss cut deeper than words. Olga's grief became a quiet, echoing wail that refused to subside, a melody sung in the spaces between sirens as another dark California night fell. But beyond the initial chaos, silence reclaimed the apartment. The police, once omnipresent, faded away into the city. Investigators continued combing through forensic evidence, cabinet doors, torn sheets, fingerprints, and footprints meticulously documented. Days later, police statements would confirm what the family already knew. Natalie's life had ended in brutal violence, a casualty of jealousy and the unchecked arrogance of a man incapable of accepting change. The community, too, reeled. The Ukrainian diaspora mourned with candlelit vigils and somber prayers in churches across LA. Blog posts and op-eds questioned the system, the neighbors, the broader world that had failed to intervene. For a time, Natalie's tragic fall dominated conversation. From the glimmering boutiques of West Hollywood to the crowded, immigrant-heavy cafes east of downtown. Whispers mingled with outrage. How could such darkness reside in a life that looked so bright? Only the young child, Emily, a living testament to the hope Natalie had once held, remained mercifully shielded from the specifics. Her bright eyes lingered on photos, drawing crayon rainbows above figures with wild black hair and wide, loving smiles. To her, the world had already changed, but the loss was not yet fully understood. It waited, a storm on the horizon of her memory. In the weeks that followed, the police handed the case to the district attorney's office. John, silent and broken in his jail cell, awaited trial. The evidence was irrefutable. Confessions, witness statements, and the ugly map of violence ensured the outcome was all but certain. Yet for Olga and for the small circle of Natalie's friends there was no consolation, no closure, only the quiet, solemn work of grief and remembrance. Every lock, every chain, would forever echo with the memory of a tragedy that had once disguised itself as love, comfort, and the American dream. The chilling truth from forensics. The city of Los Angeles, always pulsing with sirens, rarely paused for tragedy. But as the forensics team entered Natalie's once bright apartment, an air of solemnity settled over the neighborhood, a silent acknowledgement that something monstrous had happened behind the closed door. Word had already begun to swirl beyond the police tape. News vans idled at the curb and curious faces gathered at windows, straining to glimpse the professionals whose job was to read the residue of violence and restore some semblance of truth. The lead forensic investigator, Dr. Raymond Fisher, had seen his share of bloodied crime scenes in his 20 years with the LAPD, yet few had left him so sharply aware of the weight of each detail. He worked with methodical precision, gloved hands gliding over every surface, every object, every smear and splatter. The master bedroom was their starting point, a shrine to the horror that had ended Natalie's dreams. Pale sunlight crept through the blinds, splaying long shadows over the carnage. The blood-soaked sheets, the overturned lamp, the scattered remnants of what had been an ordinary life. Technicians fanned out, capturing the chaos in high-resolution photographs. Every drop of blood was mapped and measured. Fisher directed his team to collect samples from the walls, the bedding, and even the underside of the mattress. There was blood in patterns that told their own silent story. The bathroom was little better. Bleach bottles left uncapped, sponges and rags still damp with a grotesque mix of cleaning fluid and diluted blood. In the hallway, a trail of faint, sticky footprints led to the door, evidence of someone leaving in hurried, panicked increments, and then, impossibly, returning to the scene. But it was not just the physical evidence that chilled Fisher. The room radiated suffering. There was evidence of resistance, marks on the carpet from heels dug in, bruises and scratches catalogued by the medical examiner later at the morgue. Each wound mapped a timeline, blows suffered, attempts to fight back, desperate scrambling to survive amid a nightmare. Back at the forensics lab, Fisher and his team worked late into the night beneath the glare of fluorescent lamps. Fingernail scrapings from Natalie's hands revealed skin and traces of blood, genetic evidence drawing a silent, damning arrow toward the perpetrator. The analysis of textiles, torn pillowcases, a sweater with buttons ripped away, confirmed the timeline that the struggle had lasted for hours, an excruciating eternity for the victim. Luminol testing revealed even more blood than the eye could see, tracing the ghastly journey from master bedroom to bathroom and back again, a pattern of movement indicating both chaos and grim intent. Autopsy findings would soon deepen the sense of horror. Natalie had endured extensive trauma, fractured ribs, defensive wounds covering her forearms and hands, contusions on her face and scalp. The primary cause of death was exsanguination, fatal blood loss from deep wounds likely inflicted by a kitchen knife found in the trash, hurriedly cleaned but still sticky with the victim's blood. The pathologist's report, clinical, unflinching, made clear the calculated brutality. Natalie had not died instantly. Her passing had been slow, marked by pain, fear, and overwhelming anguish. As the evidence was processed, Fisher found himself haunted by questions. Who could perpetrate such violence, then try so clumsily to erase it? And had there been a moment, a single pivotal beat, when the outcome might have changed? The medical examiner's team recovered bruising consistent with attempts at self-defense, but also marks suggesting Natalie had been restrained. She had not simply been attacked in a sudden, uncontrollable fit of rage. There was time, intent, escalation, forcing investigators to consider premeditation rather than mere passion. DNA evidence tied John directly to the violence. Bloodied footprints matched the size and tread pattern of his favorite running shoes, a pair found, recently washed but still faintly stained with blood, in the back of the closet. Swabs from under Natalie's fingernails returned a full genetic match to him. His own hands bore lacerations, some defensive, some the telltale signs of skin torn by close combat. The kitchen trash, thoroughly examined, yielded damning clues: blood-soaked towels hidden beneath ordinary garbage, broken pieces of a cell phone, and a torn photograph of the couple smiling, creased along the fold where the two faces met. Fisher and his team presented their findings to detectives and soon after, the prosecution. There was no doubt that this was not a simple homicide. It was a deliberate, prolonged act of rage and desperation, covered up in a pitiful attempt to feign normalcy. The cruelty of it lingered in the lab, infecting even the most hardened officers with a sense of grief and obligation. The broader forensics report would detail every ugly minute: time of death by blood coagulation, attempts at superficial cleaning, secondary transfer of blood onto Emily's small blanket abandoned in the hallway. For every sterile measurement in the report, there was a tidal wave of sorrow left behind. Evidence not just of how Natalie died, but how her light was violently, irrevocably snuffed out. The case, in the eyes of the city, had become a symbol of something larger and more terrifying: the dangers lurking even in those who seem most trustworthy, the illusion of safety within four walls, the impossible predictability of violence. Dr. Fisher, writing his summary for court, could not help but pause over Natalie's name one last time, aware that, beyond the samples and stains, there was a story whose final chapter had been written in blood and silence. The true nature of the Prince Charming. John Black's projection of a perfect gentleman, devoted partner, and pillar of the community had always seemed impenetrable. To casual acquaintances, he was the American success story personified: educated on the East Coast, the scion of an old-money Manhattan dynasty, and now a promising tech entrepreneur. Pictures of his striking smile and tailored suits appeared frequently in glossy local magazines at charity galas and industry mixers, always on the arm of some beautiful woman, lately and most notably, Natalie. But like the pristine glass towers that dotted the LA skyline, John's exterior was merely a facade, gleaming but fragile. Beneath the surface seethed a web of insecurities, compulsions, and secrets, carefully hidden from public view. It was only after tragedy struck, and the media began to chip away at John's image, that the cracks appeared, first in whisper, then in headline. John had grown up in a world where appearances were everything, and anything less than perfection was ruthlessly corrected. His father, a notorious Wall Street risk-taker, ran the family with a mixture of bombast and conditional affection. John's mother, elegant but eternally anxious, demanded poise and success at all costs. Family dinners were formal battlegrounds, praise was rare and always transactional. Young John learned early that he was loved for what he accomplished, not for who he was. It was here, in this crucible of privilege and pressure, that John's dual nature took root. He excelled at school, collected academic honors, and won scholarships to elite universities. Yet, with every accolade grew an accent of self-doubt that would never quite vanish. Classmates recalled him as charming but strangely distant, eager to please yet loath to let anyone too close. Roommates years later told reporters of mood swings and occasional disappearances, finding playing cards and whiskey bottles tucked away in John's neatly organized drawers. The deeper investigators looked, the murkier his record became. Most telling was his pattern of brief, tempestuous relationships. Old girlfriends, tracked down from his Harvard days to Midtown cocktail parties, described John as attentive, sometimes intoxicatingly so, at first. He could make you feel like the center of the universe, but that was the thing. It was never about you. One woman, who asked for anonymity, confessed, "The adoration always came with subtle warnings, boundaries you could never cross, and moods that turned on a dime. If John ever felt abandoned or doubted, his charm could curdle into icy detachment, or in rare flashes, seething resentment." Rumors long circled in exclusive social circles about gambling debts quietly paid off by the family foundation, late-night visits to underground poker clubs, sudden moves to new cities. John's LinkedIn page boasted a series of consulting roles in tech startups, yet almost none survived more than a year. The true story, as pieced together by private investigators and intrepid journalists in the case's aftermath, was more complicated. John was a man in perpetual flight from failure, propped up by connections but always bouncing between near misses and quiet disasters. His struggle with substance abuse, prescription stimulants especially, had been a poorly kept secret in some corners. College friends recounted nights when John would disappear for hours, only to return wired and jittery, spinning wild ideas about making it big or starting over from scratch. What money he didn't lose at the poker table, he burned on luxury watches and designer goods, gifting them lavishly in public while racking up private loans and favors he never intended to repay. When Natalie first met John, he was, by all appearances, on an upswing. Fresh off landing seed funding for his app and showing up in tech blogs as a visionary under 35, he carried himself with a magnetic mix of confidence and vulnerability. To Natalie, still learning how to decode American ambition and still searching for her footing in a new country, he seemed like the embodiment of possibility. John latched onto her intense drive and outsider's innocence, showering her with attention, gentle flattery, and shared dreams of building a different kind of family. Yet the dynamic shifted as roots deepened. John, who thrived on the chase and the impression of being a savior, struggled with the day-to-day intimacy of real love. With Natalie, his idolization quickly morphed into possessiveness. Friends saw less of him. Natalie's independent gigs or nights out became points of contention, first subtle, then strident. If she succeeded, he felt eclipsed. If she stumbled, he saw proof that she needed him more than he needed her. Financially, the cracks widened. Bounced checks explained away as temporary, credit cards declined at dinner, late-night phone calls that left him pale and withdrawn. Only after the tragedy did Natalie's family learn about the unpaid debts John had secretly accrued, the late payments on their lease, the desperate emails sent to college acquaintances for cash advances disguised as business opportunities. In retrospect, Natalie's mother would recall brief moments, sharp flashes, that now read as omens. John's anger when Natalie spent too long at a modeling shoot, the cold, simmering silence when she laughed a little too loudly at another man's joke. The sense, as if a temperature dropped in the living room, that everything depended on John's mood. He was never physically violent in front of guests. His methods of control were quieter, more insidious. Cutting remarks laced in concern, sudden withdrawals of affection, a smile that turned brittle when Natalie pushed back. After Natalie's death, police dug up legal filings in New York and Las Vegas. Restraining orders, all quietly settled, never making headlines thanks to expensive lawyers and non-disclosure agreements. Former partners spoke softly of his need for dominance, recollections brushed aside in earlier, less public eras. John was an expert in apology, endlessly promising change but reverting to old patterns the moment he felt challenged. Behind the fairy tale, a different narrative now emerged. A man broken by the weight of his family's legacy, nursing old wounds and nursing grudges, unable to relinquish control lest his paper-thin identity come crashing down. The myth of Natalie's Prince Charming was unmasked as precisely that, a myth fiercely projected and desperately maintained until the day reality broke irreversibly through its diamond-bright shell. Conflict, control, and violence. The illusion that Natalie and John's family life was picturesque began to erode almost imperceptibly. To outsiders, neighbors, parents in the same apartment building, even distant relatives, John still played a convincing part. Doting partner, helpful father, a picture of American stability. But inside the sleek West Hollywood apartment, realities cracked behind closed doors, revealing tension that simmered beneath every interaction. At first the changes were so subtle that Natalie herself wasn't sure if something was wrong. After Emily's birth, John's attentions, once flattering, became suffocating. He insisted on reviewing her call logs, pressed her for the schedule of every minute she spent out of the house, and bristled with suspicion when she received messages, even innocuous notes from fellow models or freelance clients. When Natalie tried to set simple boundaries, John dismissed her, chalking up her discomfort to postpartum nerves or old-world habits. "I just want to protect you," he'd say, his voice sugary but eyes cold. Tension spiked on days when John's business hit a snag, or when Emily's fussiness made sleep a distant memory for both parents. Natalie learned to gauge his mood the moment the door shut behind him. Were his steps light or heavy? Would he greet her and Emily with a smile or a brittle silence that demanded everyone tiptoe around him? Arguments would flare unexpectedly over trivial matters, groceries, money, which of Emily's milestones should make it to Instagram. At first, they followed the same pattern: a loud exchange, a slammed door, sulky silence, then an eloquent apology. John brought her flowers, murmured elaborate excuses about stress, pressure, and impatience. Natalie, still unfamiliar with the nightmarish side of conflict resolution in her new American home, accepted these overtures. She wanted to believe these moments were flukes, bumps on the winding road of family life. Slowly, words became weapons. Where once he whispered pet names, John began resorting to insults that cut to the bone. Questions about her English, her body after motherhood, her weird foods, her longing for Kiev. "You'd be nothing here without me," he once hissed on a night when she wanted to join a modeling event. When Natalie recoiled, pushing back with sharp words of her own, John's anger didn't explode, it imploded into chilling, deliberate gestures. He hid her car keys when he was upset, changed passwords, and occasionally canceled her freelance gigs for her own health. Over time, John leveraged Emily, threatening to keep her away, questioning Natalie's competence as a mother if she ever considered leaving. Natalie began to dread the weekends, when John, flush with time and alcohol, was most likely to erupt. She learned to keep small bags packed in case she ever needed to sleep elsewhere, but the expense and uncertainty of such a dramatic move seemed insurmountable. Physical violence began with a shove during an argument about bills. John apologized so profusely afterward, sobbing, kneeling, promising therapy, that Natalie, terrified and ashamed, accepted his remorse. She didn't tell anyone, not even her mother, who suspected that something was amiss but believed it was only growing pains in an intercultural, stressful new family. Each apology ringed hollow, for every cycle only made John's outbursts bolder. He soon slapped her during a fight, later blaming Natalie's provocation. Even so, she did not call the police. The shame, fear of retribution or losing Emily, and her status as an immigrant conspired to keep her silent. What made it worse was the world's willing complicity. Among mutual friends, Natalie rarely confided in detail. John's charisma and the couple's photogenic appearances disarmed everyone. On social media, they appeared polished and loving. Emily in her stroller, Natalie glowing with fresh makeup, John's arm always casually draped for the camera. None of this betrayed the truth that John kept a running mental tally of every imagined slight, punishing Natalie with cold silence or sudden rage as he saw fit. Tensions reached new heights the winter before the tragedy. Financial struggles, John's business troubles, mounting debt, left the atmosphere at home crackling with hostility. John framed his increasing paranoia as just being worried for the family, but Natalie felt the walls closing in. When she suggested marriage counseling, John laughed, mocking the very idea as Eastern European superstition. The last weeks were the most harrowing. Natalie confided in a friend overseas, admitting the violence for the first time. She made plans to begin stacking her own savings, to look for legal advice on custody and safe accommodation. Yet traditional fears, the threat of escalation, the stigma of failed relationships in both American and Ukrainian communities, stayed her hand. John's need for control pushed into every crevice of her existence. He tracked her phone, went through her messages and installed new locks on windows without consultation. He startled easily, oscillating between manic declarations of love and icy threats. He threw plates, punched walls, whispered that life without him wasn't worth living. Emily's cries added stress and urgency to each passing day, but Natalie still clung to hope. A hope that things could revert, or that John would seek real help before it was too late. No one on the outside saw the warning signs clearly enough to intervene. The model family in the sunlit apartment had secrets too painful, too carefully managed, to be visible through the frosted glass. By the time the violence erupted beyond the threshold, it was already too late for apologies or second chances. Justice in the Hollywood spotlight. The murder of Natalie shocked not only her loved ones but also reverberated through the sprawling metropolis of Los Angeles, exposing the deep cracks beneath the surface of what many considered the American dream. As the sirens fell quiet and the police tape fluttered in the Californian wind, the gears of justice started grinding, slowly at first, then with an unstoppable momentum that swept up everyone involved. The case rapidly drew local and national attention. The combination of a striking young immigrant woman cut down in her prime, the scandalous details revealed by forensic investigators, and the stunning fall from grace of John Black, a man with every privilege, was irresistible to media outlets. Television trucks parked outside the apartment building for days. Producers scrambled to piece together Natalie's last moments, her modeling career, and her family's journey from Ukraine to LA. For the detectives and attorneys assigned to the case, the media frenzy became both a burden and a catalyst. Every detail was scrutinized, every step amplified by the insatiable appetite of a city obsessed with spectacle. In the weeks after the crime, the police partnered closely with the district attorney's office, piecing together timelines and corroborating forensic evidence. The case against John Black was strong, overwhelming, some would say. The relentless work of the detectives had uncovered not only damning physical evidence but also a pattern of controlling, abusive behavior. Family, friends, and neighbors were interviewed multiple times, sometimes reeling in disbelief at what had gone unseen. As the weeks passed, legal experts noted that the city's best prosecutors were assigned to the case, aware that any mistake might provide a loophole for a defense intent on muddying the waters. John's arrest was subdued, almost anticlimactic. He was booked in the early morning hours, led from the hospital, where he had been under psychiatric evaluation, into the waiting patrol car, head down, hands cuffed behind his back. The image, however, was instantly iconic. The once celebrated Prince Charming, now disheveled, unshaven, and hollow-eyed, his suit traded for a paper-thin orange jumpsuit. The Hollywood press swarmed the courthouse on the day of his arraignment, capturing every flicker of emotion from Natalie's grieving mother to John's weathered legal team. Natalie's family found themselves navigating a foreign legal system while enveloped in grief. Olga, her mother, was guided by a court liaison, supported by advocates for victims of domestic violence and immigrant rights groups. Lyudmila, once a secondary character in Natalie's dreams, became her daughter's public voice, speaking on Ukrainian radio, at vigils, and in interviews with stunned reporters. The family learned the painful vocabulary of the American legal system: autopsy, chain of custody, probable cause, cross-examination. At times, the process felt like a second trauma, reductions of Natalie's vibrant life into exhibits and paperwork. Still, Olga persisted. Throughout, her grief never dulled her iron resolve to see her daughter's truth recognized by the court. The public's fascination with the case only deepened as the preliminary hearings began. Local news segments dissected every motion, every statement, every legal maneuver. Social media became a battleground. Some voices clamored for swift justice, others dissected Natalie's life choices, and a few dangerously clung to the myth of John's innocence. The coverage often veered into the sensational, using Natalie's modeling photos to dramatize the tragedy or mining John's blue-blooded pedigree in search of scandal. Even in death, Natalie became a symbol of immigration, ambition, resilience, and, heartbreakingly, of how much can hide behind perfect images. At the heart of it all, however, was the slow, methodical push for justice. For months, John's legal team attempted to shift the narrative. They filed motions questioning the validity of forensic evidence, arguing diminished responsibility due to mental health struggles, and claiming that the media had poisoned the potential jury pool. High-powered attorneys gave statements at the courthouse steps, invoking themes of misunderstanding and tragedy rather than malice or premeditation. Some tabloids speculated on the pressures of American success, and even floated bizarre theories about criminal outsiders. But in the courtroom, where the ear of justice often bends to the drumbeat of fact, the weight of the evidence steadily grew. The trial itself drew crowds that packed the gallery nearly every day. The city's elite and the working class, lawyers, students, immigrant mothers, even aspiring actors chasing the next story, took turns queuing for a seat. For many, it was more than just one woman's tragedy. It was a parable about trust, violence, and the vulnerability of those chasing a better life in Los Angeles. Natalie's family was present for every wrenching session, surrounded by supporters from the Ukrainian and Slavic diasporas holding candles, flags, and photos of her smiling days. Olga sometimes wore one of her daughter's scarves, a gesture of defiance against grief. Emily, Natalie's little girl, was shielded from the proceedings, her care entrusted to relatives and family friends. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors presented a meticulous timeline: photographs from the crime scene, reports from Dr. Fisher and other forensic professionals, the recovered weapons and blood evidence, digital records of John's increasingly frantic texts and internet searches. Each detail, laid bare in clinical language, was a stone dropped into the bottomless well of loss. The prosecution built their case not only on the physical evidence, but also on the unseen chains of control and fear that had wrapped around Natalie's life. Key witnesses testified, neighbors sharing memories of muffled arguments, friends recounting Natalie's gradual withdrawal from social life, experts explaining the nuances of coercive abuse. The prosecutors drew a clear narrative of escalation, from emotional manipulation through isolation to the series of violent incidents that foreshadowed the final fatal act. They painted John not as a monster lacking humanity, but as a man whose need for control overrode every moral and legal restraint. John took the stand in his own defense, his testimony a study in contradiction. At turns apologetic, evasive, and deeply wounded, he described his immense love for Natalie and the overwhelming pressure he'd felt as her partner. Under cross-examination, his answers faltered. The prosecution gently but ruthlessly highlighted inconsistencies, reading back transcripts of text messages and emails that suggested jealousy, paranoia, and rage far beyond the facade of fragile affection. At one point, shown a photo of Natalie with Emily, John broke down, but for the jury, his remorse could not outweigh the facts. Outside the courthouse, the city watched. Journalists tweeted out verdict rumors as soon as the jury was sequestered. Advocacy groups rallied for stronger protections for victims, while law enforcement officials made public commitments to review their handling of reports about domestic conflict. The Ukrainian community held silent marches, candlelight vigils, and prayer services not just for Natalie, but for all the unheard victims whose stories never made headlines. The tension in the courtroom during closing arguments was palpable. Prosecutors spoke of Natalie's journey, not as a cautionary tale but as a call to action. Defense attorneys asked the jury for empathy, urging them to see shades of gray in John's character and circumstances. But the evidence, the patterns, and the ruptured lives were impossible to ignore. When the verdict finally arrived, guilty of first-degree murder with no possibility of parole, a stunned hush swept the chamber, broken only by Olga's trembling gasp and the muffled weeping of friends. Sentencing was swift and, in a sense, somber. The judge, seasoned by decades on the bench, acknowledged the devastation wrought but also the resilience of a community united by grief and the pursuit of justice. John listened with vacant eyes, already receding from the future Natalie's murder had destroyed. In the weeks that followed, Natalie's family received messages of condolence and support from both sides of the Atlantic. The case was cited in legislative proposals aimed at improving resources for immigrants in crisis, and in police departments reviewing how they handle potential domestic violence calls. In the public imagination, Natalie's story became a lasting symbol, a reminder that even in Hollywood's relentless glare, true justice comes not from headlines but from persistence, solidarity, and the courage to speak the truth, no matter how painful. For Olga and Emily and the tight circle of friends left behind, the legal victory was bittersweet. Nothing could restore the laughter, warmth, or promise lost in that apartment. But within the shadow of heartbreak cast by Los Angeles's glittering lights, justice had at last found its voice. The bell for the community. In the aftermath of Natalie's tragic death, the quiet grief that suffused her friends and family quickly transformed into something larger, a chorus of voices demanding change, understanding, and collective responsibility. The story reverberated not only across immigrant neighborhoods in Los Angeles, but also through social networks, advocacy groups, and city halls far beyond. For many who had never met Natalie, her story broke through the gilded veneer of the American dream, exposing uncomfortable truths while sparking long-overdue conversations about the very fabric of community life in contemporary America. Natalie's memory haunted West Hollywood. Makeshift memorials of candles and photos appeared outside her old apartment. Strangers stopped to lay down sunflowers, notes, and small icons. Some lit candles in churches, others posted online, sharing their own hidden stories of fear and resilience. Vigils were organized by Ukrainian organizations, women's rights advocates, and multicultural coalitions, each one growing larger, filled with shared sorrow but also simmering urgency. It was not just Natalie's beauty or ambition that moved people, but the chilling reminder that violence, isolation, and indifference could flourish behind even the most perfect facades. As the days turned to weeks, the tragedy became a catalyst for self-examination. Community leaders gathered with city officials and law enforcement representatives in town hall forums broadcast on local television. The question at the heart of every gathering was both simple and enormous. How, in a city this vibrant and forward-thinking, could such violence happen, unnoticed, unaddressed, untreated, until it erupted so publicly? Discussions grew frank. Natalia's case revealed gaps in the safety net meant to protect women and immigrants, frail lines of communication between police and vulnerable residents, a lack of culturally sensitive outreach, and the persistent stigma around reporting domestic violence, especially for those unfamiliar or mistrustful of American institutions. There was collective shame among neighbors who, in hindsight, realized the signs they had missed or dismissed: the nights of muffled arguments, the bruises covered by cheerful explanations, the isolation masked by curated social media feeds. For some, this reckoning carried the sting of guilt. People spoke openly about the reflex to not get involved, about the pressure to maintain privacy, and the fear of misinterpreting cultural differences as danger. Community members recounted stories of warning signs ignored, opportunities lost to ask a caring question or extend an offer of help. Neighborhood watch groups formed or grew stronger, but the conversations reached deeper, toward building trust, not just presence. Nonprofits and grassroots advocates responded with new urgency. Domestic violence hotlines expanded their language support. Shelter coordinators circulated flyers in Russian, Ukrainian, Spanish, and Korean across local grocery stores, churches, and schools. Social workers began holding workshops about healthy relationships and legal rights in immigrant communities that had never received such outreach before. High school programs invited survivors to speak and empower teenagers to recognize and reject controlling or aggressive behaviors, in partners, friends, and even in family. Natalie's mother, Olga, despite her unimaginable loss, became an unexpected symbol of resilience and advocacy. She spoke at candlelight vigils and news conferences, urging people, especially immigrants, to look past shame or fear and reach for support without waiting for disaster. Her message, sometimes trembling but always clear, was echoed in editorials. No one should have to suffer alone. Ask your neighbors how they are. Tell your daughters their voices matter. Believe your friends when they share their pain. In response, the City Council initiated reviews of its policing practices and response protocols for missing persons and suspected abuse. Police officers received additional cultural sensitivity and trauma response training. Agencies collaborated to simplify reporting for non-English speakers and strengthened connections to crisis resources. At the state level, lawmakers cited Natalie's case when proposing legislation to close loopholes in domestic violence protection laws, especially to aid foreign-born spouses and partners reluctant to seek help for fear of immigration consequences. Journalists, too, shifted their narratives. Whereas early headlines had emphasized scandal and sensational aspects, later stories explored larger questions. What does safety look like in a multicultural city? How can neighbors, friends, and colleagues stand as the first line of defense against hidden harm? Some news outlets dedicated series to invisible victims and profiled survivors who emerged from similar circumstances. Podcasts and radio shows featured legal experts, counselors, and activists discussing both red flags and proactive pathways to safety. For the Ukrainian and wider Slavic communities, the tragedy was especially galvanizing. Churches became centers of support, offering legal aid clinics and translation help, organizing childcare for survivor mothers, and hosting confidential group counseling. Elders convened panels where longtime American immigrants exchanged stories with newcomers, breaking down the myth that silence or stoicism equals strength. Young people, many of whom had felt adrift between cultural worlds, volunteered to translate, fundraise, and spread information on social media. Meanwhile, immigrant rights groups pushed for reforms not just in Los Angeles, but across the country. Natalie's photograph, radiant, candid, sometimes with little Emily curled in her arms, became a rallying image for national advocacy campaigns. Their message was fierce and unyielding. Everyone deserves safety, regardless of who they love, where they come from, or what language they speak at home. Within workplaces and schools, the shock spread introspection. Human resources departments reviewed harassment policies and added anonymous reporting tools. School counselors noticed a spike in questions from students, and several started peer support programs led by older teens who had witnessed domestic conflict at home. Even professional modeling agencies and entertainment companies began consulting with experts to ensure international newcomers felt supported rather than isolated. While there was recognition that policy and institutional change take time, the call to vigilance and compassion found fast resonance on personal and local levels alike. Yet for all these efforts, real progress was measured in smaller, quieter shifts. A neighbor knocking with soup and a gentle check-in, a friend pausing to ask about a bruise, a family deciding to talk at last about what they had long been told to keep behind closed doors. In the months after Natalie's death, more women, immigrant and native-born, came forward to seek help, emboldened by her story, inspired by the strength of her mother, and moved by the solidarity shown throughout the city. Natalie's loss ultimately rang out as both a caution and a call. Her memory became entwined with the voices of those who survived, those who intervened, and those who admitted, in moments of humility, that they could have done more. Community centers now host annual events in her name, pairing grief with action, fundraising for shelters, facilitating seminars, and honoring the advocates who remind the world that violence flourishes most easily in silence and indifference. The American dream, her story insisted, must be more than surface success or private aspiration. It is a promise to care for one another, to notice when something is wrong and to reach out even when it's uncomfortable. In the city's resilience, its commitment to change, and every quiet check-in or act of courage, Natalie's legacy endures, a soft but insistent bell tolling for vigilance, empathy, and the relentless work of building true safety for all.